Exposition, an LMC Experience original podcast.
Hey, welcome back to the Exposition podcast. I'm your host, Micah Obama Sims, and I'm here with my co-host, T.
Hi.
And today we have a very special guest today, Professor of Political Science, Ryan Hiscocks.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Of course.
Of course. We love you. I enjoy your class. It's very enjoyable.
Yeah. Love me, man.
Yeah.
You're buttering me up this early. All right. Okay. All right.
So we're going to start first about what got you into political science.
Ooh, that's a good question. How deep do you want to get in the psychology of it?
As deep as you want.
So, a direct connection to a political science classroom. My first introduction was in the fall of 2001. I took my first political science class, Introduction to American Government, or whatever they called it at Long Beach City back then, at Long Beach City College, and really enjoyed it. Not to the point where I thought I was going to be majoring in political science until the end of the semester when, out of the blue, the instructor, Dr. Donald Douglas, who I believe is still teaching at Long Beach City College, called me aside. Ryan, talk to me after class. And I know that can be words of dread for a lot of students. I knew I wasn't up to anything nefarious. I had done anything wrong. So I was curious. And he basically just asked me point blank, what are you studying? What are you doing? What are you here for? And I said, film or, creative writing. And he said, don't do that. He said, you should do political science. You should consider getting a PhD in political science. You're a natural. I don't know what statistic he said. He said something like I'm one of the top 2 or 3% of students he's ever had. And at that moment, I decided to listen to him. Literally. 1 minute conversation. And that was it.
That's great. Where'd you go get your master's for political science?
All of my education was in Long Beach. A little bit up in Humboldt. I took 1 or 2 semesters at College of the Redwoods in Eureka, but the vast majority of class I took were at either Long Beach City College, then Cal State Long Beach for both my bachelor's and master's degrees.
Alrighty, here's our first question. What is political science to you, and why is it important?
Man, can we talk about something else?
Are you sure?
I do this like all day. I'm kidding. Yeah. What is it to me? It really, for me, I think the original fascination with it was that I was finally getting answers to questions that I had always had. Observing the world, and knowing what little I did throughout my life about history and what I had observed of people, myself. It always and will always fascinate me to try and figure out why we are so terrible to one another. And so seeing this in the world and, knowing about historical examples, I've always been kind of fascinated. I know it sounds really, like the way I frame that sounds really negative, but looking into things like, some of the major religions in the world didn't really suffice to help answer those questions. Looking into other disciplines didn't really do it. And then I took political science and it started really to answer those questions, focusing in on discrepancies of power and how power is made manifest and the types of things it lets people decide made a lot of sense to me.
Gotcha. My second question I'm going to go to is, what is power, and how does the concept of power relate to political science?
Oh, man, this is like a classroom. You know what? Political science, anytime you're studying political science, that's what you're studying.
Yeah.
And at this point, all my students have tuned out.
Yeah.
Because they've all heard this a million times, but yes, it's about power, It's about how people get their hands on power and the means towards which power is used for the ends that these people decide upon. And, it really does explain a lot. It doesn't explain everything regarding human behavior, but it's one of the major variables. There's no doubt about it.
And why do you think power is important in the field of political science, in your opinion?
The importance of the discipline, I always ask my students a question to explain it and again, my students have all heard this. Some of them may be able to preempt this. But one of the questions that I ask is, what's the difference between the United States and North Korea?
Mm-hmm. What is the difference?
Well, I mean, to me, it's the government.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it is the structure of the government. And this is not something that I figured out on my own. This is old political theory,
Mm-hmm.
knowledge. In other words, there's a definite connection between structures and processes of government, types of government, and the quality of life that people that have to live under that government have access to.
Gotcha. You want to ask a question?
There's a question I know that is on here. Why don't you read it verbatim? That way I don't mess up my own words. Do people even know what democracy is anymore?
That's a really good question. Democracy is really difficult. It's difficult to understand. It's easy to conceptualize. Right? It's rule of the masses,
Mm-hmm.
Power to the people might be another kind of democratic expression. But what goes into a democracy, or the profound implications of democracy, are definitely lost on most people. In democracy, we are all, at some level, especially when we vote, we're all equal. And that's profound. There are other arenas in life in which we are equals. We're equals at some level as consumers, right? We can all go on to Amazon. If we have the money, we can all buy basically the same products.
For sure.
There's no discrimination in that regard, again, other than class. So there are ways in other aspects of life that we are equal. Politically speaking, though, democracy radically equalizes the playing field.
Mm-hmm.
And don't get me wrong, the system is still heavily weighted towards people with finances and money and wealth. There's no doubt about it. And that'll always be the case. But when we vote, and voting is the main way in which we determine who has power, we're all just ones.
Well,
Regardless, maybe outside of the peculiarities of the electoral college system. But all that being, said, we are equal. And see, but the radical part of that, and the part that I think, sorry for slapping the table, that I think a lot of people miss, though, right? People your age typically don't vote, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're way under 50%. So, if I see someone your age, and the question is, are they going to vote? The money-making bet is always on no. You're talking about 28% in the last election, maybe. At the height, 30% in 2018. So 70% of the time, 75% of the time, people your age aren't actually doing it. And that's how we actually decide who has power over us at some level. And the thing about it, and those of you that were at the talk I gave before the midterms last semester, was that people under 40 are now the majority of voters. And people your age are coming into voting age in extremely high numbers. So not only is, what are the millennials, Gen Z, are you Gen Z?
yes. Unfortunately so,
Are
yeah.
you sure?
Yeah.
What's next?
Generation Alpha.
Alpha? Okay, so
But
my kids are Alpha?
Yes.
Yeah.
You can't, call them that.
No, dear God, no.
Yeah, then their ego is just going to be ridiculous.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
I already have a son who thinks he's an expert at everything.
Because, I mean,
Like-
we get called Gen Z, but then we get called Zoomers, and that's, I don't know, that feels derogatory
I
to
don't
some
know if
extent.
I mean, a boomer could say the same way, but it's funny, just okay, boomer.
That's true.
Well, yeah, and my grandkids are going to be saying, "Okay, Zoomer" to you guys. So,
Yeah, so-
you're going to be there. You're going to be outdated eventually.
Oh, shoot.
I know what it feels like. Trust me. But anyways, the radical part that I think a lot of people in our country who don't vote are missing is that, democracy allows the majority of people to outweigh who are always a minority. And in our country, minority, I know a lot of people hear that and they immediately think racial or ethnic minorities, right? Minorities with regards to sexual identity or sexual preference. But remember, the ultra-wealthy and the wealthy are also a minority in our country. So democracy actually gives people a way to wrest some amount of power away from maybe the will of that minority. And there is something radical in that.
But do you think there's possibly a connection between the ultra wealthy and like how they I wouldn't say like use the internet and to like swing to people to vote for them and using their money in order to have people.
Yes, I mean, money is put to politics, there's no doubt, and we're seeing money at levels in our political system. Elections, I think we just had the most expensive state Supreme Court race in American history. I don't know the number, but the number that just pops into my head, and this could be wrong, so maybe I shouldn't say it, but I'll just say this, it was tens of millions of dollars. That is not a typical state Supreme Court race. It's incredible, the amount of money we're seeing. So yes, no doubt money's being used to shape our political choices, to shape our political will. Absolutely. And again, like I said, the money's always going to have the advantage. But in the voting booth, maybe that advantage is mitigated somewhat.
Well, I guess that was kind of the follow-up question I had before yours was, do you think that part of the reason younger people don't feel comfortable voting is because they feel like those votes go to people that aren't actually in their interest? They're interested in the people who are funding their campaigns.
Yes, and I don't think it's just young people who think like that. A lot of people, and when I was growing up, it was very common to hear voting, especially at the presidential level, to be described as picking the lesser of two evils, right? They're all liars, they're all bums, they're all going to disappoint, they're all going to make promises that they're not going to keep. This is kind of common political banter in our country. I can tell you what my students say with regards to why they do not vote. A lot of them say that they just don't understand what they're voting for, or they don't have any idea of who these people actually are. So, if you're looking at a system that is, you don't just wake up and know how to do this, or it doesn't intuitively make sense to people. So asking people to take part in the system is asking, again, I think most students are extremely responsible in this regard, that they understand that they should probably know more than they do. And I don't think you can fault people for not wanting to take part in a system that they feel like they don't understand. I don't think there's really anything wrong with that. I wish they understood more.
Well, I guess
that's kind of the purpose of my life.
Yeah, I was going to say, who at that point does it fall on to, educate people in that regard, to make them feel like they know the politicians that they're supposed to be able to vote for?
Well, I mean, we're all, socialization is the responsibility of all of our major institutions, our families, our churches, whatever organizations we're members of, they all kind of play a similar role in that. And it's also the responsibility of the individual. Once you recognize that it's important, assuming that you've come to that kind of crossroads in your life, then you have to ask yourself, what's your orientation? If it's important, what are you going to do about it personally?
Yeah.
So yeah, I do think there is an imperative on the individual to also take an active role. We got to upkeep this thing. It's not promised. There's no doubt about it. And the only thing that helps us maintain it is an educated, informed, passionate electorate. There's just no other way about it.
I agree. Yeah.
All right. You want to move to another question?
Sure.
Alrighty. You introduced this reading to me in one of your classes, Francis Fukuyama, in End of History.
Yes.
Okay.
You better get the title right.
The End of History, question mark? Okay. I wanted to ask you, what did Fukuyama mean by the end of history, and also, are we at the end of history? It's a very, I think it's a very interesting piece.
You're asking me to, reiterate what I wrote on so many student assignments. The end of history is this idea that history is defined, at least at this largest possible bird's eye view, or at the widest possible scale, the largest possible level of analysis. That history is cyclical, and the cycles of history are delineated by ideological conflict. So that when you have these widespread ideological disagreements, that part of history is that human beings embody these ideologies and fight it out. And ideologies win, like democratic, liberal capitalism and ideologies lose, like fascism and communism.
Mm-hmm.
Is it the end of history? Well, as you know, Fukuyama wrote this at the end of the Cold War, and absolutely, there is no doubt that if you accept his parameters and his descriptions of what the historic cycle includes, yes, we were at the end of history. Fascism had been defeated in World War II. Communism came crashing down, or at least the most significant example of a communist state, and the earliest example of a communist state, although I don't think anybody who's familiar with Marx would say that the USSR was somehow an embodiment of what Marx described. But that regardless, in name, communist, an attempt to manifest Marx, the earliest attempt at this, that it crumbled, that the empire collapsed, would indeed suffice or fit into Fukuyama's theory. I would also say that history is restarted, that we're back into it. And the obvious ideological foil to Western democratic capitalism would probably be, at this point, the Chinese system. That is, embraces some measures of capitalism, but is still fundamentally autocratic. That is a single-party rule.
Well, would you say that's really different in ideology then? Because maybe the structure in which they perform capitalism is different, but at the end of the day, there's still a capital investment, there's a capitalist profit to be made.
So assuming that, that they've embraced and are going to continue to embrace and open up more to a free market capitalist system with, social safety nets and other, socialist programs, which they have. What they don't have is democracy, and that's the other side of the coin, right?
Yeah.
So Fukuyama is essentially describing not only an economic system, but also a political system that's attached to it. So although they might have a similar economic system to the capitalism that we have in the United States or in the West or in the developed world, they definitely do not have the democratic structures, processes, and institutions.
Yeah.
So in that case, they would be an alternative, right, to large-scale human organization.
For sure.
And that's what would give rise to a new cycle of historical conflict.
Well, would you say there's also maybe kind of a profit motive for the West to engage with that ideological war? Because
that's a good question.
Because on the national scale, that's what politicians have been talking about for the past couple of years or so, especially lately. Trump, on his most recent interview on Fox, he went hard against China. He was very punctual in how they were the next big threat for the West and America. Would you say that proposal of conflict is something that the West wants, almost, to a degree?
Wants the conflict? No, I don't. I wouldn't agree with that. I would probably say that ex-President Trump is in that expression of China being, the next kind of major antagonist to the West, and specifically to the hegemonic control of the United States, that he's right, and that he's with most of the experts that are analyzing that relationship. Whether or not we want that, no, I think what we want is trade and we want Chinese goods. And I think what we want is China to develop into a democracy. And 30 years ago, by the way, and most students wouldn't know this, 30 years ago, we would have expected at this point, looking forward 30 years from the 90s, that China would have been at some level much more of a democracy than it is now. It's not only failed to democratize, it's gone in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
With Xi Jinping, it looks like they have reintroduced lifelong political rule, which is something that they had abandoned decades ago. So they seem to be actually going against what a lot of political theorists expected to happen. That essentially, because China in the very late 1970s, the closing part of the 1970s, starting to embrace an open market system, you see levels of wealth dramatically increase in China. You see, the uplifting of something in the neighborhood of 400 million people
Mm-hmm.
out of what we would describe as abject poverty. We've never seen anything like it in American history.
Mm-hmm.
It's literally the fastest close to poverty that we've ever seen, affecting the largest number of people in the shortest amount of time. So what China has done, people describe as an economic miracle. And the argument went that if they embraced capitalism, which they have, and their standard of living goes up, then once you have this massive, largest in history establishment of a middle class, that with that middle class is going to come a demand for political rights. In other words, that democracy inevitably stems from, or can stem from, a capitalist system that increases the standard of living, increases the wealth, and establishes a middle class. And we haven't seen that happen in China. We've seen protests, we've seen attempts, but the system has not buckled under that pressure at this point. And again, in fact, they've gone, by some observers, in the opposite direction.
Yeah. Well, I guess the point that I was more getting at with the question, not to say that your answer was incorrect or anything, but I guess on a structural level, that the United States has the veneer of complete free and open democracy. Well, we see a lot of things that end up countering that.
Right.
Whereas China is the unadulterated version of that, where the state is blatantly in control of things.
Right.
And I think that small difference in power is what sets the two apart, and is what makes politicians in America seem so, maybe not even skeptical, but simply just worried about it, because they see an unwavering version of what they're attempting to do already.
Oh, that they would like us to embrace the Chinese system?
Yeah. Maybe not embrace, but, politicians in America, redlining, for example. One of the oldest tricks in the book is to stop people from having the power of their vote. That's one of the oldest tricks in the book. Something like the filibuster, just to hold up the ability to make legislation. There are a lot of
gerrymandering. Yeah, there's a lot.
And with those systems already in place, so embedded in the American identity, doesn't it feel weird that we're so against this other country that does the same thing?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, they don't have those competitive elections. And it's funny because, we, at some levels, our system was designed not to be radically democratic. It was designed to be the opposite, to essentially frustrate democracy at most, especially at the federal level, through most of its processes, right? The Electoral College is a great example of that. The fact that, senators were appointed by state legislators or state executives before they were elected directly by the people in those states, right? So originally, within the first draft of the Constitution, the only people who were directly elected into office by the people were House of Representatives members. Every other elected representative had a different indirect system to get into office. So we have not fully embraced ever, any version of radical democracy. We are a legitimate republic. We're a legitimate democracy, although there's a lot of room for improvement on those lines. There's a lot of ways in which the voice of the people could be empowered that we do not embrace. China, on the other hand, calls itself, a republic, and they are definitely not. Saying that you're a representative of the people, but at the same time denying people the choice of a different representative is not what a republic is. So, we have it, but we could do it more. They claim it, and they could definitely do it better. They're not doing it at all.
All right. You go.
No, you go.
All right. So here's a little bit more of a downer. Why haven't?
Yes. I've been waiting for this. Yes.
Why haven't we gotten rid of slavery in America? According to the 13th Amendment, with the clause that says, the exceptions
for prison, essentially prison labor. Well, states have started to do this. States have started to outlaw prison labor as it has existed in our country I would assume since well before the 13th Amendment.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, God, man. I wish I was more of an expert on our criminal justice system. This would probably be a really good question for Dr. Anthony Haley.
Mm-hmm.
Why haven't we got rid of it? I mean, racism definitely would explain that, as well as, we are typically, and I don't know if we're unique in this, I would assume that we are definitely not, but, we kind of revel in punishing people for committing crimes. The rehabilitation aspect of the criminal justice system, I don't think has ever been the
goal?
The reason,
Yeah.
or the overarching goal. The goal has been punishment. But yeah, I wish I could give you a better answer to that.
I think another big aspect of it is a lot of prisons, especially in the United States in comparison to other countries,
Are private.
Yeah, they're privatized.
Yeah, and I was actually going to just say that too. And a lot of corporations also make money on prison labor.
Yeah.
So there's an economic interest both in the running of the prisons, like you pointed out, and corporations that use that labor and are able to leverage that labor into profits.
How did we get here from, social media and someone texting to, especially what we saw on January 6th in 2021? Why do you think social media has such a polarizing effect on politics?
Whew. These are really huge questions.
Yeah.
Social media, the internet in general, is the most postmodern invention in history. In other words, it is really hard to establish a center when anybody can put forward their opinion, anybody can make persuasive arguments or attempt to make persuasive arguments, even about things that are batshit crazy, and have an audience for that. How do you establish common ground when every voice can be elevated to the same level through the internet and magnified by social media? I mean, how do you establish the ground rules, or how do you keep ground rules in those circumstances? One of the empowering things is it gives everybody, no matter what you're into, there's a community out there that you can find, and that's at least theoretically a beautiful thing. But what if you're into some really nasty stuff? I don't mean nasty, I mean negative, violent, vile, racist,
and I mean that's
homophobic. What if that's what you're into? Well, you're going to be able to find people that are also into that, and you're going to be able to empower each other. So it's, I don't know, at some levels it's also an almost perfect expression of what humanity is, right? We're not just love, peace, forgiveness, altruism. We're also the other end of the spectrum. So the internet empowers everyone in that regards equally.
And I think it's also, especially like you said, in relation to January 6th, I think a big part of it is disinformation, like how Fox News was just broadcasting straight election lies, and how...
Yeah, and that's coming out in court that they actually knew that they were broadcasting lies.
Not only did they know, the judge in charge of the case just a few days ago said that Dominion, the machine manufacturer for voting machines, can no longer use January 6th evidence against Fox News, despite the fact that Fox News, according to most publications, is the place that started it. They were the ones who told everyone that the election was stolen. They gave Trump the platform to speak that day. And
It's the internet's been horribly disruptive, and at the same time, there's a lot of good that comes out of it. And AI is going to be a whole, is the next level of this. AI, coming into the semester, the big news was the Chat GTP, and the fact that this thing can write, an essay in 10 10 seconds?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been writing articles for like the New York Times and Washington Post.
I thought you were just about to say it's been writing my essays for all semester.
You know that assignment I turned into yesterday? That was all written by AI.
Yeah, there you go. But you understand what I'm saying? So there's that aspect of it, but what else does AI do? You know, there's a lot of evidence, and I just heard this yesterday, literally on NPR, that AI is way better at diagnosing disease in human beings, certain diseases, than a doctor. So there's things that, there's tools that, artificial intelligence are going to be able, there's things, very important things that it's going to be able to help us with. It's going to literally save lives.
Well, I guess the big thing, especially with AI in relation to politics and just, the concurrent events, is how people like Fox News might use it, If you enter in a few key words like, stolen election, voter fraud, whatever, and then it pumps out an entire article or piece for Tucker Carlson to go off on, what do you do with that kind of power? The power to just make any story or piece of information.
Do with it?
Yeah.
And, you have to bounce that off the, protections for the free press. What are the limits? National security is a definite limit to what the press can do, or, the free reign that it has. There are common sense limits. I think most people would agree that the technology is moving at a much faster rate than we're able to comprehend, much less react to.
Yeah, because even social media, we're still behind, I'd say, at least a decade in how we, as a country, make legislation protecting people on social media, protecting people, of marginalized
For
groups.
sure.
I think there's a lot of discussion still in that realm, let alone in the realm of AI, which most experts have already stated is going to be the next big thing in the coming years.
It's a tricky balance. How do you protect the freedom of the people to express themselves fully while also legislating or limiting what they have the ability to say? It's really difficult. If you're going to limit speech, you're essentially going to empower government to create those limits. And do we want government telling us what we can and can't say?
Yeah, for sure.
And what is acceptable, what's not acceptable? It's hard.
And
Because hate speech is also dangerous.
It's very dangerous.
It translates into action. People use speech. Every single person who goes somewhere and shoots up a place, that's not just something they decided to do at the drop of a dime that morning. There's a process that gets them to that place. And information or disinformation, hate speech, we know what the common threads are that get someone to that place. Hate speech is a common thread. Hate speech is very often turned into hateful action. I think there are compelling arguments that can be made that there needs to exist at some level limits. What those limits are, I don't know.
Well, I guess if you knew, then we wouldn't be talking about it.
Well, how you legislate that, I don't know. It's difficult. Again, are we going to empower the government to tell us what we can and cannot say? The other argument is that you would rather have people being able to express those publicly, right? That hate essentially dies in the sunlight. That if these people are just talking to themselves and are just operating underground, that you're going to get a much more, a much more concentrated version of that, rather than having, a way to air these opinions publicly and also suffer the consequences when the public disagrees with you. The ostracism or maybe the shame that can come with expressing those ideas might also be an argument in favor of allowing those ideas to continue to be expressed.
Yeah.
But again, I don't know where that balance is, and it's a really difficult, complex issue.
No, your concept of the hate speech leading to violence, and then the kind of ramifications of it once it does breach the surface. I think that's a big part of why we haven't seen more movements like January 6th, is because people in the Trump sphere saw how bad the backlash was. They realized that they were actually, they could still be put to justice. And,
Well, a lot of people lost their jobs.
yeah.
By the way, I think the prosecution, the DOJ, has about a 100% conviction rate.
Mm-hmm.
They've arrested, over 1,000 people. This is going to be the largest prosecution of a single crime in American history by far.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, they're batting 1,000. They're putting everybody in jail or under house arrest, or, I don't know what the lightest sentence is. I'm assuming it would be public service. I don't know, but
And that's just now, not even the immediate aftermath when one of the leaders of the Proud Boys came out as an FBI undercover.
Informant.
Yeah, he was doing undercover work, and they turned in almost the entire organization.
Best believe that even though we don't have legislation restricting hate speech, there was a hell of a lot of people in our government infiltrating these organizations and trying to stop or interject before the hate speech does become that violent action. There's no doubt about it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of people in our government and law enforcement across this country actively trying to stop those things from happening. Again, I don't think hate speech itself is a complex issue. I think it's destructive. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
Mm-hmm.
It's what you do about it that becomes the complex issue, the difficult issue.
Alrighty, so we've hit the 30-minute mark. We have ask you, is there anything else you would like to let the audience know?
No, I think thanks for joining us. Who's out there?
People.
Who am I talking to?
Literally,
You're talking to my mom right now.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Is she gonna listen?
Say hi to my mom.
Hello, Micah's mother. I really enjoy having Micah in my classes.
Oh, that feels really great.
And he's turned me on to some really good music.
Oh,
so much respect.
Alrighty, so we would like you guys to check out Law Society. We have he's the main man for Law Society.
Advisor, yes.
Advisor. And we also have a Law Society member with us in the room, right?
Hello.
T, exactly. We will see you next time. Next Tuesday, we'll have our episode with Edward Haven. And that's all. Bye.
Bye.